Okay, we are live. Welcome, thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning into tonight's ATS and ANAH Talk Series, a collaborative project between the Art and Technology Studies Department and Artist Needs Art Historians. This second event features Hamza Walker. Hamza is director of LAXART, an independent nonprofit art space in Los Angeles, California. He teaches in the low residency MFA program at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He was the director of educations and the associate curator at the Renaissance Society at the University of Chicago from 1994 to 2016, a non-collecting museum devoted to contemporary art. He received the BA in art history from the University of Chicago.
Tonight, Hamza will be discussing their most recent exhibition, Some Reach While Others Clap, by the artist collaborative Postcommodity. For this project, the collective collaborated with Starlight Rod and Custom, a Los Angeles-based custom and restoration auto shop that specializes in pre-1970s American-made cars. The work focuses on the support beams of the gallery as a metaphor for acknowledging Indigenous Americans as a historical and current foundation of Los Angeles. If you would like to ask Hamza questions, please leave them in the chat box.
Okay. So without further ado, please welcome Hamza Walker.
Hey, all right. So the silent and lonely world of the Zoom room. I trust you are all there. So for the sake of efficiency, actually, Art 21 just released, it just dropped. I don't even know if it's online yet on their site, but they just released the upcoming season. And Postcommodity is one of the episodes, I think the very last episode of the upcoming season. And it's very nice. They made available the segment that just features Postcommodity, where they talk about the Art Institute project and the project that they did here at LAXART. So I actually thought I would play that. Because you get to actually hear about the project in the artist's own words, professionally documented, really, really beautiful thing. Then I'll go through the project a little bit. I can give anecdotes. And then there's another project that I worked on 20 years ago that I think bears, that's worth talking about. But I'll also talk about other art historical aspects of the project that they did here that aren't discussed in the Art 21 episode. So from here, I'm going to share a screen. Let's see if I got it all. Where is everything? There we go. Okay. Let's see, you can do this, you can do this. My techno incompetence. Okay, optimize screen share for video clip. Boom, boom. Okay, here we go. Pay no attention to the sound effects that I make. All right, so here we go. Now let's see if I can, once I push play here.
It's looking pretty good out here.
Looking good. This could be our opportunity.
Yeah, I think this is it. The piece is called the repellent fence. What we are proposing to construct is a 2-mile monument that crosses the border.
Sorry, forgive my ignorance. What you guys are talking about is another fence on the border?
It's almost to flip the script or to complicate the way we understand fences.
When I look at the borderlands, I see a clear demarcation of colonization. That's the underlining meaning of that border.
If the word Mexican in this country is synonymous with alien and illegal, we've forgotten the indigeneity of those people.
People can't remember what it means to be American, not United States citizen, American as in of the Americas.
Indigenous peoples of this hemisphere have had to bear genocide, but they also mixed with Spanish settlers and families. I am a product of that. I grew up in north central New Mexico, where the communities were all indigenous pueblos. My ancestors are Native American Pueblo people and Chicanos, Mexicanos.
I grew up 3 hours from the border. I was son of a Cherokee plumber in a town that was largely defined by migrant farm workers. You saw indigenous people everywhere, whether you've been anglicized or Hispanicized. 2 more would be for sure.
Okay.
Postcommodity was born for the purposes of doing repellent fence. That was our first idea out of the gate. That idea started in 2006. Our whole art practice was built out during that time.
The idea of the balloons is to intersect the US-Mexico border. That signified a suturing or connecting of the Americas together.
In indigenous cultures, this eye means an open eye, an eye that's aware, an eye that's knowledgeable.
This work is testimony that indigenous people presupposed this hard edge border. Suturing is remembering
And healing.
and reasserting one's place on the land.
The border wall, it's a very long line, but what is the border really doing? It's like a corral. It's trapping Americans more than anything. It's fencing us in.
At the same time, indigenous peoples continued moving northward, marking a new journey, the new migration. So what does it entail? Like,
It'll be 8 of the 12 columns will get filled all the way down to the bottom.
okay.
The remaining columns will get filled 3 feet down. And what those will do is those will hold the additional rebar that will stick up out of the top of the column.
And that'll take a day, right?
That'll take all day. So we'll be here. Like I said,
10 years ago, I met these guys at the Arizona State University Art Museum. They had a slab of the concrete floor cut and mounted on a pedestal. And then they suspended a microphone over the earth beneath and had a speaker with a native peeposh ceremony being played at a very low volume. So as you walked in, you weren't sort of struck by the sound until you got a little bit closer. The project was very related to the land literally beneath the museum, and that was burial grounds. They seemed to always be able to find something very interesting about the site where they were working. I was really interested to see what they might think about in the context of Chicago.
Wow.
It's pretty sick to watch.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a little dance. After building the repellent fence, we started thinking about our future demographically here in the United States. The U.S. Census projected that 2043 will be the year that white people in the United States become a minority. Here in Chicago, we're in the middle of one of the largest migrations of peoples from the south to the north. A lot of people think of Chicago as being ground zero for the great black migrations. This is even larger in scale. There are currently over 750,000 people in the county who are of Mexican descent, and that number is growing, will continue to grow. So the expectation is that the landscape is going to be transformed culturally, politically, socially. We wanted to build a piece to mark that this transformation is happening, this migration is happening.
Throughout all of Latin America, you oftentimes will find these columns that are projecting off the rooftops of homes. And a lot of times people who are not from Latin America misinterpret the meaning of those columns. They think that the homes are unfinished.
Es un castillo para nosotros. Así le llamamos. Vamos, una columna fuerte por donde se va a levantar un edificio grande. La típica de que después ahórrale y después vamos a hacer el segundo piso. Esa es la típica. Siempre dicen eso y siempre quedan esos castillos ahí a punto del segundo piso. Algunas veces se logran y algunas veces no.
What the columns often signify is a pragmatic approach to growth. As the family expands, the home expands. And so the house is always growing, always emergent.
This piece and the skyline that surrounds it, it's a way to acknowledge a very strong Mexican cultural tradition being established here in Chicago. And that cultural transformation also happened a long time ago in California. So we wanted Los Angeles to inform the next project.
You're like the mayordomo of lowriding or custom or rod.
Doing what I do for a living is I build people's dream car or, you know, their bucket list car. And I know the stereotype is like the bouncing Impala. Everybody's thinking Boys in the Hood, Friday, but it's deeper than that. Come on through, I'll show you the rest of the shop.
Lowriding, it's about hacking the car, reimagining the car as mobile sovereign space. And we have always imagined ourselves and fashioned ourselves as hackers. Chicanx people have been able to develop themselves in the city through this process of modifying and salvaging and recycling. Every car is a story. You know, Chicanos are the pillars of the city. We want to build new public memory about LA.
So the way we're gonna set this up is we wanna run like a mid to late 70s style graphic.
Yeah, just wait till we got all the colors on here. That's when it really explodes, you know?
Similar to what we're doing in Chicago, in LA. We're taking the architecture, the very bones of the building, and we're hacking it.
Go ahead and polyester primer it and block.
Working with Postcommodity, it was about self-expression, helping us expose lowriders to a different audience, for us to be able to leave a mark in a permanent structure that my grandkids will probably see someday. It's very empowering.
These I-beams are like the indigenous people, like the Latinos that built LA, right? That everybody walks by them day in, day out. We don't notice the guy who's selling elotes at the corner. We don't notice the guy who's cutting our lawn. But it's part of the infrastructure. It's part of the strength that makes the city what it is.
The beauty of us working together. It's incredibly powerful. Salud, salud. We feel that in order to have a world, we need to divide ourselves from one another.
How are you?
Good. But that love we get to experience oftentimes when we're making art together. It sort of restored in a lot of ways our faith in humanity. Our self-determination is proliferating. We're starting to find our way in places that we wouldn't otherwise be in.
We've made the covers, which are cedar boxes, so that those columns are being preserved. They'll be there permanently with that building. Columns that no one will ever see, but at certain times of the year, those cedar boxes will be opened up and taken off to acknowledge that history of a people and a community.
When people of color become the majority, I hope we'll have built enough dignity to be good stewards of one another, of each other, of ourselves, of the land. Postcommodity isn't an identity-building project. Our job is to provide space for people to connect their own narratives of cultural self-determination and to allow a new public memory to be born.
You have to unmute Hamza.
Well, no, you just would have heard me using profanity in terms of my techno incompetence. You have to stop the screen share in order to get the escape feature back.
Oh God.
Yeah, so it's silly.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
So that was what I think is a beautiful introduction to Postcommodity, better than anything I could fit in terms of hearing about the project in their words. Just a little bit about LAXART, where this took place. This building, well, LAXART is an alternative, nonprofit, independent alternative space in the middle of Hollywood. And it was founded in 2005, and its original mission, it's been expanded in scope, was really centered around emerging talent here in Los Angeles. And I'm the second director in the organization's history. And I was essentially hired to usher the organization into a new chapter of its life. As with most things, at a certain point in the life of institutions, people, homes, you need a makeover. I was hired with the task of a LAXART makeover. So expanded the scope of the mission, so it not only we didn't forsake emerging talent, but we expanded the mission to simply encompass contemporary art, developments in contemporary art in a very open fashion. So we show artists from all over the United States, all over the world, emerging talent, young, old alike. Wherever art goes, kind of we go. And I wanted a more general mission statement. And that way, anybody who occupies the seat of director can interpret the mission, however they choose in that regard. So with respect to this building, LAXART moved from where it was founded in Culver City, 15, 20 minutes away, to Hollywood. And this used to be a recording studio, actually. It's had a few, the bulk of its life was as a recording studio. It was also an animation studio, actually, when it was originally founded. But after it was a recording studio, it was carved up into an office building of sorts, an accounting service. And the only remaining architectural features of the original building outside of the facade, the perimeter of the building, on the inside, pretty much all the walls have been taken out or moved around over the course of the building's history. But in terms of the support structure of the building, there are 5 of these H-beams. Sorry, let me share screen again. And now I'm gonna go to here. Turn this off. This off. Share, right. So if I go here, and then I want to scoot that out of the way so that I can say slideshow. Play it from the top. Take it from the top. There we go. Oh, where'd my slide go? There we go. Okay. So in a way, this is where the project with Postcommodity started. These H-beams. There are 5 of these beams in the gallery. And one of the things they didn't mention in the Art 21, these 5, they only painted 2 of the beams. And the other 3 beams were actually painted white. So part of the exhibition was stripping the paint off of the other 3 beams. I mean, the 2 that they had candied, and candying is the term that you use. That's the lingo for in custom car culture for the type of paint job that for lowriders. So the 2 candied columns, because it's like candy, also had to be stripped. So part of the exhibition was stripping all of the columns down to their bare bones, which is what this is. Right? Why can't I use, hang on one sec, hold on. I have to stop share, go back. There we go. Oh, did I lose everybody?
I don't think so.
Hang on. Do I have to go back? Did I lose everybody in the share part? Hold on, let me go to here, right? Then I want to say share screen. I got that part, but I want to slideshow. Play from current slide. Okay, I don't want to, okay, there we go. I can advance. Okay, sorry about that. So the columns are stripped down to their bare bones, and it was interesting. It revealed the paint, the original paint or stenciling that was actually on the columns when they were raw. So these 5 columns are the original bones of the building. And so part of the exhibition was stripping things down, exposing the columns, right, the bones, and then to have the 2 candied columns, right, to then to candy them, right? So you've got a subtractive process on the one hand, the other 2 columns being additive, right? Or these 2 are the ones that were painted. They chose these 2 columns in the entry because of how they were situated next to one another. And there is, in terms of what these beams are holding up, it's actually a very simple post and lintel structure. So there are very large beams running, they are running this way through here, right? And I think there's one running across there. So it's a very simple post and lintel structure. They chose these two beams because of their proximity to one another, and they could do a kind of a yin and yang, right? A male, female type of relationship between these two columns in terms of as a paint job, right? So in terms of talking about the spiritual forces of creation. How about that? That's a better way to put it than simply gender binaries, since those don't exist anymore, or we're trying to transcend them. So part of it, in terms of exposing a facet of the architecture of the building, I would argue relates to a history of institutional critique, right? So institutional critique, where artists of the late 60s, early 70s, conceptual artists, wanted to call attention to some aspect of the institutional framework that is responsible for defining and determining what it is that we call art, right? The institutional framework of the gallery and of the museum, insofar as that structure is responsible for defining what we understand as art, right? So there are a number of different ways to think about the trajectory or history of institutional critique over the course of the 20th century, right? You could think about it in terms of beginning with Marcel Duchamp, right? So the urinal as a way of calling attention in terms of the very question, what is art? What makes something art, right? Duchamp and the urinal is saying, okay, anything that is hauled within the museum or the gallery can be designated art, right? So it is the institution. In terms of what art is, depends on where art is, right? Or the power, the institution has the power, anything brought within it can be deemed art, right? That means the institution has the power to define or determine what it is that we see as art in a way, right? And then you can fast forward up to a figure like Michael Asher, right? Whose own operations on the physical structure of the gallery, right? Through removing paint, removing gypsum, removing walls as a way of calling attention to the formal architectural features of a given space in a very literal fashion, right? And from there, he was able to make a kind of grander, let's say, allegory for a certain Marxist political position, right? About exposing the material conditions or determinants of art institutions, right? I guess that would relate to, in a sense, I guess, historical materialism, perhaps. So I think of this project as being, and this being Michael Asher's hometown, as being closely aligned with that course of thinking. Except in the case of the two columns, whereas Asher was about subtracting, what I like most about the Postcommodity project is that it was additive, right? It wasn't simply the idea of adding to the columns in a way that is permanent. So that literally you have to use etching agents. There are about 15 layers of material on those two columns, right? This is auto paint, auto lacquers, right? Clear coat. There's the chemicals used to clean it, strip it down, then they put layers of a synthetic primer, right? Then you've got to sand it, then they do another layer, more layers of primer. They add the coats of glitter, of silver flake, there's adhesive, silver flake, clear coat, more adhesive, more silver flake, more clear coat. So that by the time you go to actually add the color, right, Manny, who is the guy who actually did the paint job on it, he's like the prima donna. He comes in at the very end. There's a whole, 2 guys were in here 4 or 5 hours a day, just sanding and priming and sanding and priming those columns just to prepare it for Manny. Manny did his hit in two sessions, 2 8-hour sessions. I watched him do it. No, he didn't measure anything. He basically put a piece of tape down the center, and the pattern is improvised, essentially. Incredible. The way that Manny was thinking about the layers of paint, right, and they're translucent. He's got to think kind of 3, 4, 5 steps ahead in terms of what's going to go on top of what. But it was really great to see him just work it out, right, with respect to this very elaborate design. Let's see, through. There we go. So there's a detail. Yeah, so there they are. Right, so this here, for example, and there's a lot of light. These things soak up a lot of light. They were hitting them. Each of these columns has like 5 very high wattage bulbs on it to make it dance in terms of the glitter, the silver flake. But there's also these moments where there's a real translucence, an effect that's akin to basically a watermark on paper in terms of the quality of translucence. And he did that, this section, for example, he used as a stencil, he used cloth. He actually used one of his mother's tablecloths. He regrew up and he liked the pattern on it. And so he puts that on, masks it out, spray paints it. But as far as how he's thinking in terms of, again, layering, right? He's thinking 2 to 3 steps ahead. But this thing is wholly improvised, just watching him lay the tape down. And he's really funny. He will not work without music. So his daughter was with him. All she did was basically DJ. She would organize the paints for him and just play the mix. And certain times he would go, okay, can you change the mix? He's a huge Smiths fan, which I really love. So he and his daughter would actually have like a father-daughter Smiths sing-along. And I was really envious. I was thinking, my God, I wish I could do a Smith sing-along with my daughter. So yeah. So Manny, really, really, really great. So in terms of a relationship to institutional critique, right? What I was trying to say is, I think they managed to have full integrity to, a practice like Michael Asher's, but at the same time to flip it. So instead of being built around disclosure or removal, that they can actually add to the columns, right? But at the same time, what they're adding becomes an essential element on the columns, right? You can't, once this is done, it's like you can't unpaint a car, right? I mean, once this stuff is on there, it is bonded to the metal. So that was, I think, really, really important in terms of an important aspect of its meaning, right? Then there's the whole history of the I-beam itself. And these actually aren't I-beams, these are actually H-beams, which were invented in the early part of the 20th century. So the H-beam, these particular beams were only, when this building was built in 1929, I think the H-beam was only 7 years old, right? And the H-beam is really a key technology. The old I-beams had to be riveted together. The H-beam was able to be essentially extruded. So it's basically one piece of metal. It has a much higher strength than the older I-beams. The cost to make them significantly lower. And it was the coming of the H-beam essentially that allowed for the skyscraper, basically, as we know it. So Manhattan, the coming of the building of cities around that time, the skyline, it's built on the H-beam. So I think it's a really beautiful way of pointing to a kind of materialist history, right? Of something that we just take for granted in a way, right? But again, all the other metaphors that one can build on, you know, as they were talking about in the Art 21 video, about the labor force of the city, right? Being essential to holding it up, right? I think it's very beautiful. So that's this project of Postcommodity. Now, another way in terms of, you know, my own thinking about it, in terms of doing exhibitions, it was great working with Edgar Hernandez and the crew at Starlight Rod and Custom, and also a way of engaging with lowrider culture, right? So I've always been quite critical of exhibitions that engage with popular culture, right? So, you know, hip hop exhibitions, surfing exhibitions that tend to have, you know, they don't, the way that they appropriate, I can't think of a word, it's the end of the day, aspects of those culture, but they don't actually have the thing itself in the museum, right? How can you represent or sample, I don't know, invite, discuss, signify aspects of culture that are bigger than the fine arts and outside the museum? How do galleries and museums open up and have projects that maintain a full integrity to those cultures, right? Like a subculture, like low riding, right? So 20 years ago, I did a project with a collective called Simpark, and it was about skateboarding. So this was at the old Hyde Park Art Center. And this is the name of the project, it was called Free Basin, in terms of the language of drugs. Yes, it is a pun on free basing, cooking up of cocaine. And the old Hyde Park Art Center, it used to be a ballroom, so it had 16-foot high ceilings. So basically, Simpark installed a wooden pool, a kidney-shaped pool made out of plywood. And this is the top. So right now, these stairs here go down. So this is under. You're now under the bowl. So when you come in the gallery, which is over here, right, you could go up these stairs. And when you went up the stairs, then you were up on this deck looking down into the bowl, right? So you could walk all around underneath the bowl. Now, the skateboarders would be skating up in the bowl. So if there was a skater up there while you were walking around, it would be great when you were really close up to the piece. The idea of having somebody on a skateboard just like skating like 8 inches away from your face, right? If you went up to the bowl itself. All right, so here's another view. Right. But again, a way of opening the gallery up to signify or have that culture inside of the space with full integrity to what it is, right? So you do a hip hop show, it's like, I don't want the fashion, I don't want the record covers, If you're gonna do the show, then it's a living thing. How do you have the actual thing itself in the space, in the gallery, right? And how do you make it something that the people who participate in that culture can come in and appreciate and lay claim to, right? And what's really great with the 2 columns that are here, 2 occasions, the UPS guy came, delivered a package, and he looked at the columns and he said, oh shit, is that a lowrider job? Like, let me check out that paint job. Came in. FedEx guy delivered packages, looked at the columns, knew instantly what it was, came into the gallery and wanted to check out the columns. Totally blew my mind. But I thought it was really, really beautiful that they responded to them. They just happened to just see them. Yeah. So yeah, let's see. Let's stop I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to show a video and then we can get into questions. One last thing. So share screen again. Share sound, optimize for this. So this is a video for the SIMPARC project. Oh wait, I have to choose what I'm going to share. What do I want to share? I want to share. What do I want to share? I want to share that. Choose that. Share that. Move this up. Where are you? Here we go.
Go for it.
For 30 pieces of silver they sold a Rasta, and why did they do that? For 30 pieces of silver they sold a Rasta, and why did they do that? What a la la bam bam bam. What a la la bam bam bam. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, sailing forward and away they go. Daniel in the lion's den, they thought they would never see him again. Ooh, yeah. What a la la bam bam bam. Ooh, yeah.
What's your favorite move? I'm gonna say like nollie hard flip, leg 180 out.
What a la la bam bam
I can find. Oh, whoops. There we go. You can do this. Let's see. All right. Is that back to normal?
We're back to normal. Thank
Back
you.
to normal. There we go. So went over time, and now we can deal with questions, answers.
If anybody has any questions, please, put them in the chat box. Kristen, okay. Thank you so much for an amazing talk. So many inspiring ideas and projects here. I'm interested in how so many of these works intersect with architecture and large-scale fabrication. I'm curious that on the collaborative effort of project management between the institution, curatorial team, and artists for these projects. How much of this responsibility is left to the artist? How much risk is the institution asked to negotiate? At what point does permanence factor into the decision-making process, etc.?
Yeah.
Thank you, Kristen.
Let's see. Okay, closed captions. Okay. Okay, great. You got the closed captions fixed. I was looking at the earlier. So Kristen, yeah, this is a great question. A great series of questions. On the note of institutional risk, right? That was, you can see in terms of like having skateboarders there, having to sign waivers about, being injured on the artwork and those kinds of things. So the institution did have to absorb a lot of risk in that regard, right? In terms of liability, right? I mean, you know, and to what extent, what, you know, this spaces like the Hyde Park Arts Center and LAXART are able to, in some sense, assume a level of risk that I would say larger institutions are quite hesitant, right? So I would say the kind of, so for example, working, you know, with Simpark and Hyde Park Arts Center, you can see the issue of liability about broken bones and being on things and the skaters having to sign a waiver if they wanted to skate, and everybody was cool, nothing happened, you know. The Hyde Park Arts Center being insured. So there was that. With Postcommodity, they were using a grade of paint that I have never seen the kinds of warning stickers on this paint. This was the kind of stuff that I didn't even know if this stuff was even legal in California, or at least in Los Angeles. They had to order this paint. It was car paint, like really super toxic shit. So in terms of the whole staff couldn't be here for 3 weeks, right? One of my staff members, Catherine, was pregnant at the time. Her baby was due January 5th or January 20th, can't remember. So she was gonna begin her maternity leave, right? She was supposed to begin her maternity leave on January 5th. I started her maternity leave December 5th. It was like, forget it, you're just out of here. You're not coming anywhere near this place. I was out of town for 5 days, and I get a call from our next door neighbor who's just like, oh my God, we can smell the paint. You know, some people are complaining about headaches. So I had to shut Edgar down. I said, Edgar, stop everything. You know, I'm gonna fly back and then we'll deal. So I got on an early flight, cut business short, came back, doubled down on the exhaust situation, right? Because it was auto paint. And this is, you know, and thank you for asking that question, Chris, because people don't know of, like, it's like at the level at which you're dealing with this kind of project, institutions, like, it's a whole lot of shit, you know? And to me, that is the work, right? I mean, there's what people see, there are the ideas, there's the art, but there is having to work with people and to work through these kinds of problems that are very, very real, especially when they're at the level of health and well-being, right? So I had to double down, right? Seal everything off, double the ventilation mechanisms. Like, I just went out to Home Depot, me, Edgar, Chris, we figured out, okay, get twice as many fans. We got to get air in, get air back out. It was completely homemade, right? So initially they were talking about doing more than 2 columns. And I was just like, by the description that you're giving, I think in terms of a time frame, I think 2 is going to be fine, you know, and you'll do the covers off site. But in terms of liability, risk, those kinds of things, we absorbed a whole lot of that, right? In terms of permanence, and this really is a great question. When we went into it, Postcommodity approached it not as permanent. It was just like, okay, this is gonna, and I was like, no. What Edgar's describing is like, and like I said, you can't unpaint a car. And I think Edgar may have told me that at one point when I was like, oh, he's like, what are you gonna do with this afterwards? Before he got into it. And he goes, you don't know what you're gonna get. You have no idea what he said, there are 15 or more layers of shit that are gonna go on those columns. This is very permanent, very real. And it was in those discussions with Edgar before they began that the project, in a conceptual way, kicked into high gear, because the issue of it being permanent then prompted a whole set of discussions around, covering them up and then being able to open them up at future dates, right? And then it became, how is the space going to be used, right? The idea of these things as ritual objects, right? So then we had 2 closed door meetings with members from the Latinx community here and a Tongva elder. And the Tongva are the natives, the tribe that is native to Los Angeles, the Tongva people. And the Tongva people actually aren't on the US, the official books, but they are so they aren't a recognized tribe in the sense of recognized by the federal government, but they are a people that were here originally. So in terms of land acknowledgement, I acknowledge the fact that I am on Tongva land. So the discussions, because of the issue of permanence, right? And that prompted a whole other level of negotiation between, curatorially between me and Cade and Cristobal. And the project, I feel like that's a whole other order and layer of richness about the project. About, okay, if they're permanent, then how do we cover them? So having Edgar design these covers in a medicine box, which is what Cade was referring to, those columns are made out of aluminum. But when he said that they were cedar boxes, a cedar box is a box in which a medicine man or an elder would keep objects of sacred significance that would have healing powers. You keep them in a cedar box. So Cade and Cristobal began talking about the columns as ritual objects and being covered up in what they began to refer to as cedar boxes, even though they aren't literal cedar boxes. But in terms of a certain symbolic significance of the columns, right? They wanted them to be, figure out a time and a date for them to be displayed on a regular basis. And in that respect, over time, they would acquire a ritual significance, right? But that whole discussion around those columns came out of the fact that they were permanent. So that was a huge, huge element in terms of how we proceeded.
Okay, so you had a question about immortalization. We were having this conversation, and I don't know, Wu, you want to ask the question?
Yeah, sure. When Bofa and I were first looking at the work, I read somewhere that the white pillars do work as a casket, but I kept thinking like how is it gonna, like what is it covering? I thought that the 2 pillars just closed on each other, not on the beams themselves. Mm-hmm. And when you showed us the pictures of the the white covers covering the beams, I was like, oh, like I see. And we talked a lot about immortalizing and the process of immortalization and how these beams, with these layers of paints, like this, all this meaning becomes symbolized in those beams. So, and it was really interesting to hear about how permanence, brought up all this conversation too, because we kept circling around the idea of permanence and immortalizing.
Oh yeah, yeah. So they take on a whole, like you're saying, the covers which are on the floor, right, and those cushions, the upholstered portion of the covers is to protect the covers, right, when you put them on, right? But those are also a reference to the custom upholstery job that is in a lowrider, right? So but they were really weird in terms of scale because people couldn't figure them out. They're like, what are those things? They're really strange. And then when I told them they were covers, it was like, well, they remind me kind of like caskets, right? And they made literal the idea of like a low rider, the emphasis on the low part. But the caskets and the whole idea about a covering that was that would amount to death in a way, right? But there's also this notion of like an afterlife in a sense. So it's quite beautiful in terms of the way that those metaphors came about through the literalness of the project, right? It wasn't anything through, they're not layered on, but they arise out of.
I wanted to actually, and I'm sorry if this came up in the presentation already, but the use of the green and blue and the fuchsia, right? So the green and the blue is the east, and the fuchsia is the west. Is it?
Yeah, they gave Edgar and Manny. They basically said it's up to you. So Starlight Rod and Custom, they said to Starlight Rod and Custom is they said, you know, male, female, yin, yang, forces of creation, opposites. That's all they said to them. I mean, I was there, and Edgar was like, because you know, this is the guy who doesn't do art he was just like, at first he what's funny is like, who was going to take this job on, right? So they interviewed shots, but Edgar had a whole trip about lowriders, and I love Edgar. So he was like a natural for this. He was completely up for, open, really progressive. Like other guys, like, you want me to do what now? Like they didn't understand it. It was abstract, and so they gave Edgar all the latitude about what was going to be painted, how it was going to be painted, and those were all the instructions that they gave him. So they didn't say like one red, one blue when they said yin and yang. So he chose the electric blue, green, aqua, and the fuchsia, you know, and a little bit of this and that one, and a little bit of that in this one. Yeah. So
the complementary color, maybe more so
yeah.
Contradiction color. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions for Hamza? We're actually nearing the final hour. Nope. Okay. So, well, thank you, Hamza, for a wonderful presentation. So it's finally great that Kristen said thank you with double exclamation mark. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and you know, for spending your evening with us. Please join us again for our third ATS and ANAH series, where we'll be speaking with Christopher Catrone. We'll be discussing the critical theory of art as technology. Andrea Herrick said thank you, Hamza.
Yeah, all right, guys. Okay.
Before we wrap up, I want to acknowledge members from the brilliant ANAH team, Audrey Awa, Stella Kwan, and Justine Guzman for bringing our vision to life. I also wanted to give a really special thank you to Jennifer Dorothy Lee, Laura Lamb, and Michael Powell, who are in the backstage with us today. And we remain sincerely grateful for SAAC Student Government, Campus Life, and the Department of Art History, Theory, and Criticism, and the Department of Art and Technology Studies who have made the series possible. Please join us on November 13th for our next talk with Christopher Catrone, as Bopa said, and thank you for attending our talk.